The hotel room wasn't meant to feel like a home. It smelled like fresh linen and temptation, not love. The promise between them had been simple, clean, sharp, and final. Just one night. No names, no strings, no looking back. But as soon as he touched her, really touched her, it all began to unravel. His fingers found the zipper on the back of her dress like he'd known her body for years. She stood still, lips parted, heartbeat pounding like thunder behind her ribs. The fabric whispered down her sides, and the silence between them was electric. He kissed her shoulder, not rushed, not hungry, just reverent. And that was the first mistake. Her plan had been simple. One night of control. One night where she could forget everything and just feel. But when he looked at her like she was art and not a passing moment, the walls she built began to crack. They didn't undress each other. They peeled themselves apart slowly, teasingly, like every layer of clothing was a confession waiting to be made. He was warm, steady, and terrifyingly patient. She was trembling, not from fear, but from the realization that something dangerous was building inside her. And it had nothing to do with lust. On the bed, time slowed. He moved above her like he was worshipping more than her body. His hands knew the rhythm of restraint, but his eyes, God, his eyes burned with the fire of someone who already regretted promising to leave when morning came. And then came the whisper. Not a moan, not her name, just one single, traitorous question between breathless kisses. What if we didn't stop at one night? It hit her harder than any touch. She tried to shake it off, clung to her control like it was her second skin. She didn't believe in forever. She barely believed in tomorrow. But his lips, his hands, the way he memorized every gasp she made, like he was writing her into the universe, it made her wonder. When they collapsed, tangled in sheets and sweat, she stared at the ceiling and said nothing. But her body, still pressed to his, still pulsing with the echo of him, it begged for more. And so did he. She woke up to heat, not sunlight, not coffee. Him. His hand rested across her bare hip, thumb lazily brushing her skin like it had forgotten it wasn't supposed to be there. His breathing was slow and steady, too steady for someone who'd agreed to be gone by sunrise. The agreement had been clear. He was supposed to disappear. But there he was, still tangled in her sheets like he belonged in them. She should have pulled away. She did in single quotes. Instead, she turned just slightly and found him already watching her. No sleepy fog, no awkward tension, just those dark, impossible eyes, awake, alert, and filled with something dangerously close to longing. "You're still here," she whispered, half accusation, half plea. His reply was maddeningly simple. "I didn't want to leave." That should have been her cue to panic, to remind him, remind herself, that this wasn't a love story. But then his fingers moved again, this time slower, lower, down the curve of her back, across the arch of her thigh. Every inch he touched erased another rule. They didn't speak after that. His mouth met hers, not in heat this time, but in certainty. Like the night before had only scratched the surface of something they were never meant to survive. And as he kissed her, her defenses, those carefully stacked bricks of pride and detachment, crumbled with every brush of his lips. She climbed on top of him like a woman possessed, not by lust, but by wanting. wanting to taste the forbidden, wanting to break the rules they'd made. His hands found her waist, her spine, her thighs gripping, grounding, giving in. It wasn't fast or frenzied. It was slow, deliberate destruction. Say stop, he whispered into her neck. If you say stop, I'll leave. But she didn't say it. She couldn't. Because every time he touched her, he stole another truth. And the biggest one yet was this: she didn't want him to leave. Not anymore. Their rhythm was deeper this time. Not just skin against skin, but breath matching breath. Heart syncing with heart. It wasn't just bodies finding pleasure, it was souls recognizing something terrifying. She'd had lovers. She'd had nights. But nothing like this. Nothing that left her trembling even after the storm had passed. When it was over, she didn't roll away. Neither did he. Instead, they stayed there. There. Exposed. Quiet. And then he spoke low and raw against her skin. I know we said one night, but I don't think I can pretend it's enough. She wanted to say something clever. Something that would remind him she wasn't the kind of woman who fell. But her silence betrayed her, and her fingers, curling against his chest like a secret prayer, told the truth her mouth wouldn't. She didn't want to pretend either. The rules were gone, burned, buried, forgotten beneath the weight of touches that meant too much and moans that sounded like confessions. One night had never stood a chance, and neither did they. It started with silence, the kind that only existed between two people who had already crossed too many lines and were about to cross more. She stood at the window, wrapped in nothing but one of his shirts. He sat on the bed behind her, watching, always watching. His eyes were heat and weight and something else she didn't have the courage to name. You haven't asked who I am, he said finally, voice husky from sleep and something deeper. She didn't turn. You haven't told me. Another silence. He got up, crossed the room and stood behind her, close enough for her to feel the breath between his words. His hands didn't touch her this time. They just hovered, like even he knew that one more touch would turn the world upside down. I wanted this to be simple, he said. But you're not simple. You make me forget how to leave. She closed her eyes. Because the truth was, she didn't want him to leave either. And that terrified her more than anything. Then he moved. Not away, not out, toward. His hands found her hips, and she didn't stop him. His mouth brushed the side of her neck, slow, reverent, like he was memorizing every freckle, every breath. And then he whispered not into her ear, but into her skin. I've touched women before, he said, but I've never felt like this. Like your body is saying things your lips won't. Her knees went weak. She turned, faced him, challenged him with her silence, and he stepped forward like a man drowning in the decision. Then he kissed her like it was the first time, and the last, and something holy in between. This wasn't the night they planned. It was messier, wilder, slower, more dangerous. His mouth traveled everywhere, down her neck, her collarbone, the soft curve beneath. Every kiss asked a question. Every touch demanded an answer. And by the time he reached her thighs, she was begging without words. She guided him to the floor, pulling him down like gravity wasn't enough. And when his mouth found her again, lower, braver, deeper, she realized this wasn't about sex anymore. It was about truth. He kissed her like he was unraveling the lies she'd told herself. That she was safe in her loneliness. That one night was enough. That her body didn't need to be known like this. That she didn't need to be known like this. Her back arched, her voice broke, and her hands clawed at the air because his mouth wasn't just giving her pleasure. It was giving her recognition. He didn't worship her. He understood her. The difference was devastating. After they stayed on the floor, wrapped in skin, tangled in breath. Words were unnecessary until she finally spoke. "What are we doing?" she asked, not looking at him. He ran a finger down her spine. "Something. I'm not ready to stop." And neither was she. Because his mouth had told her everything his heart was still afraid to say. The sun came in like an unwanted witness, gold and quiet, spilling across tangled sheets and tired bodies. She sat on the edge of the bed, his shirt barely covering her as she pulled one leg up beneath her, arms folded, hair messy from all the places his hands had been. The clock blinked the time she didn't want to see. Morning was here, and so was the promise they both thought they could keep. One night. That's what they'd said. But now she knew better. He was behind her, half awake, propped up on an elbow like he hadn't stopped looking at her even in sleep. His voice was low and hoarse when he finally broke the silence. "I don't want this to be over." The words hit her like a bruise. Not a punch, not sharp, just deep. She looked back at him, and for a second, she hated how soft he looked. Not because it made him weak, but because it made her vulnerable. The kind of vulnerable that made her want to forget every scar she'd built her life around. She stood slowly, letting the shirt fall off one shoulder, daring him to break the silence she wasn't ready to fill. He didn't. He'd just watch her move, like every step she took away from him was some kind of betrayal. Their clothes were scattered like memories, half folded, half forgotten. She picked up her dress, held it in her hands, then dropped it back down. "Why did you stay?" she asked. He sat up, the sheets falling low on his hips, revealing the lines of a body she'd already memorized in the dark, but somehow felt shy looking at in the light. "Because I didn't want it to feel like goodbye," he said. "Because I thought maybe you didn't either." She didn't answer. Because he was right. She turned her back to him, pulling her dress on with trembling fingers, every movement slower than necessary, and in that silence, she felt it, the ache. Not between her thighs, not on her skin, inside, like her heart had gotten used to the weight of him beside her. When she finally looked in the mirror, she didn't recognize herself, not because she looked different, but because she looked seen. She walked back to the bed and sat beside him, not touching, just there, close enough to feel his warmth, but far enough to pretend she wasn't already mourning the moment. She'd have to walk away. He reached for her hand carefully, like asking permission. She let him, and when their fingers locked, it felt less like a goodbye and more like a pause. "I don't know how to do more than one night," she confessed, voice barely above a whisper. He leaned in, pressed his forehead to hers. "Then let's start with the morning." And in that quiet, with the sun on their skin and the air between them thick with what they couldn't say out loud, they didn't make another promise. They just held on a little longer, because their bodies had already said what their hearts couldn't. This was never just one night. She stood in the hotel doorway like it was a cliff. One foot inside, one outside, one last breath between her and the real world she'd sworn to return to untouched. He sat on the edge of the bed, half-dressed, hair a beautiful mess, gaze fixed on her like he still couldn't believe she was real. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say that didn't sound like a risk. Her bag was over her shoulder, her heart still on his sheets. She turned the handle, slowly. The sound of the door unlatching was louder than thunder. It echoed in her chest, in her throat, in her bones. He stood, wait, and she did, because that voice, the way he said her name like a secret no one else was allowed to touch, was something she'd carry longer than the bruise of his hands on her hips, or the memory of his mouth on her skin. She turned to him. "You're really going?" he asked, quietly, not to make her feel guilty, but like he genuinely didn't know how to let her disappear. She nodded. "We said one night." "You said that," he said. "I just followed the rules you gave me. And you broke all of them," she whispered. His smile was sad. "No, you let me." There it was, the truth. Raw, ugly, beautiful. She'd let him see her every inch, every sound, every part she'd sworn she'd never share again, and somehow she didn't regret it. That was the worst part. She didn't feel broken. She felt ruined. In the best way. He took a step forward. She didn't move. "You don't have to run," he said. She shook her head. "I'm not running. I'm choosing." "Choosing what?" "Distance. Before it's too late." He looked like he wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. And somehow that restraint hurt more than any touch would have. Her fingers hovered on the doorframe. "If I stay, I'll want more." He nodded once, as if that confession cracked something inside him. "And if you leave, I'll still want you." Silence again. But it wasn't empty. It was full of every unsaid kiss, every unpromised future, every breath they might have shared had their lives been different. Then she said it, quietly, honestly, like the goodbye it was always meant to be. "Thank you for ruining the lie I told myself." That one night couldn't mean everything. He stepped closer, but not enough to stop her, not enough to trap her, just enough to say goodbye with his eyes. And with the softest voice she'd ever heard, he said her name slow, aching, final. It didn't beg her to stay, it let her go. And somehow, that made it hurt worse. She left before she could change her mind. The hallway was cold. Her hands were shaking. Her legs remembered him with every step. And her chest was burning with the sound of the way he said her name. That was all she took. No number. No promise. No lie about next time. Just that voice, low, reverent, unforgettable. The voice of a man who touched her body, cracked open her soul, and still let her leave. She'd promised herself one night, but her body would remember forever, and so would he.